Hello, everyone. I'm Abdelrahman Awad, and I will show you how to integrate Vee Validate into your own project, and this current project at least. And to get started quickly, I might have internet issues, so I will be closing the camera to save some bandwidth. And you're not here to see me anyways, you're here to see some code. So I will do that, and let's get to the code. And sorry about that, guys. So let's get started immediately with this. You should be on the project start 3 branch. And if you're not, you just need to install these packages and make sure you have that wonderful form styling that you already did with Vanessa in the last session. So we will need the VeeValidate package, add VeeValidate/Zod, and add VeeValidate/Nuxt. So that's the packages that we need to get started. If you are on the branch, just make sure that their versions are correctly set to 4.11.1, because just using the latest and greatest is always good. We also need Zod, but that should be installed for you. Most of them should be installed for you. So let's get started with this. Another thing is, in your Nuxt config, I want you to make sure that add VeeValidate/Nuxt module is being used, right? Being configured in the modules array. So with that all out of the way, we can, I guess, get started talking about the form we have here. Right now, our form doesn't really have any kind of, validation or any kind
Really
of submission
quick, can you
handling.
zoom in for us? It's a bit small for us. Splendid, thank you.
So we will get started with basically making sure everything in the form works in terms of validation, in terms of handling submissions, and maybe spice up the form a little bit by adding some interesting behaviors. So we might not have enough time to tackle all the tasks, but hopefully we will. So let's get started with that. So first of all, we need to open the projects form component, and this component is pretty much what you have seen so far, and what we will do is integrate VeeValidate into it. Now, VeeValidate has many ways that you can use to integrate into your existing form, and it's really interesting depending on how the form is complicated, how complex it is, what kind of components it uses. So it's really a matter of style and a matter of how your project is laid out. However, in this project, we can pretty much do anything we want here. So in your actual branch that on the branch end, you will see that it's using the components approach to integrate the form. And this is pretty much straightforward. Like, you use a form component, which is coming from VeeValidate instead of the form element. So you scroll down there and you fix it as well for the form tag. And that's one step. The other step is to use the field component inside the form field. But we are not doing that in this live exercise. We'll be using the composition API, but it's totally up to you. Both will achieve the same end results. So it's really straightforward. Now, one quick word about VeeValidate is VeeValidate, it positions itself as a kind of a framework that you can use to build forms, but you are doing the building. It's just a bunch of abstractions that you will use to build your own form. So it's not doing the building for you. You will still be doing it. So we'll see how that works. So first step is we need to tell VeeValidate that this is a form, right? This component right here is a form. So we can do that by calling a composable function called useForm. And the great thing about the Nuxt module is it automatically imports it for you. So as long as you have the VeeValidate module installed, add VeeValidate/Nuxt, then it's automatically done for you. You don't have to do it. And just by doing that, I want to show you something in the Vue DevTools. So let's go to the Vue DevTools and notice that you have a new tab called VeeValidate once you call that useForm. And if you click on it, you'll notice that VeeValidate now knows that there is a form here somewhere, but it doesn't have any fields, it doesn't have anything. So we will fix that right away. So let's bring useForm down here first. Same thing, nothing really changed. So let's start by, how do we tell VeeValidate that there are a bunch of fields here, right? We have the title field. So there are multiple ways to do that. First way is to use a function called define component binds. Now let me make this a little bigger so we can see the type of stuff I'm working with here. So define component binds, all it does is creates a bindable object for you that you can use on your components. So if you are using third-party components or your own components, like the one right here, this is really easy to use. So first thing is we will create a title object, and the title object is created by calling define component binds and just give it the name of the field, title, right here, and that's almost it. Now all you have to do is call vbind on the form field for the title and pass it the title. This is pretty much done. And once you do that, notice that now the VeeValidate div tells you, hey, I see a field now called title. And if I type into the field, it tracks its value, right? So this is basically what we need to do. We need to tell VeeValidate, hey, this is a form and these are the fields in it. However, if we follow this approach, like imagine doing this for every single field in here. Like imagine we do this for description, and then doing this for the image, and then for the category, soft cap, hard cap, starts at, finishes at, and that will be really messy, right? Like that's a lot of fields. So that means this isn't the greatest approach to follow either. And because that the form field component that we built is really a custom component, so all we need to do is head over there, and just like we did with the form, we can do pretty much the same thing with this component. So just like we called useForm, we can call another function called useField. This useField function accepts like the field name. So we can do props.name, but that's not really correct because props, we will lose reactivity once we access that name. This is like Vue props stuff. Like we will lose the reactivity here. And just to make sure VeeValidate keeps track of the field name, just wrap it as a getter, right? This is a pattern that you will see a lot in the libraries nowadays, since VeeValidate has really, Vue has a lot of abstractions around this getters idea. So yeah, just do that. And we can grab the value from here. And then that means we no longer need to track the value ourselves. Like we don't need that. So once we save this, notice that immediately all our fields are now registered and VeeValidate tracks all of them, which is really great. Like if I type here and hover over the title, it says current value is whatever I have in there, and here is some random other value, and everything is tracked for us now. So right now we achieved value tracking, and that means a few things. First, let's do something really nice here. So the second argument is the validation rules. We don't have validation rules at the moment, so we just pass in undefined. Then we have a kind of options object that we can specify. Now, do you see this portion here, right here in the code? This does the V model integration stuff. Like it emits a model value update event whenever the value changes, and whenever the value changes, it updates the inner value. However, VeeValidate, again, it makes certain abstraction that makes this easier. So you don't need that, and you just tell it to sync the model like this, and you can sync pretty much any kind of model you have. And now your component already supports vModel and out of the box without you having to write any kind of logic for it. And VeeValidate handles all kind of edge cases here, like if the values aren't matching, if the values do match, but are like objects. So it kind of handles all these kind of edge cases for you. So you don't have to worry about infinite loops or any kind of that stuff. Now we have an error here already. I can tell because my component name turned red, and this is because it's TypeScript, of course, is complaining. However, it says, I know exactly what's the problem here. It's because by default, VeeValidate assumes that the field value is unknown because it can't make that assumption. Is it a number? Is it a string? So to be safer, it assumes it's unknown, which is similar to any, but not really. So all we have to do is tell VeeValidate, hey, this field is going to be either a string or a number, because we have a bunch of range fields in here, right? So it makes sense it's going to be, there are some numbers involved here. So we save that and everything seems all right. Let's go back to the projects form and let's clean some things up. First, we no longer need vModel at all. So let's get rid of all the vModels we have. And I think that's it. Like we got rid of all the models. So we save that. It's still complaining because, yeah, this is a TypeScript, and which is really nice. Since if you are using Volar, you should be getting these kind of errors, or Vue language server for VS Code. It tells me, hey, this form field component needs a model value, which is correct because we made it required here. So I will make it optional because I like doing that. I don't want my form components to always require a V model. It could be there, but also we can skip it. So we can do that, and everything is back to green. So that's almost like we are almost ready here, but we will notice some things here, weird things here. Like if we hover over hard cap, soft cap, the initial values are undefined. This is because we have no way to tell VeeValidate that the values, the initial values are these ones we have right here. So what we will do is grab these values, remove this form, and then pass it to the form composable function. We'll pass in an options object, and then it will have something called initial values. And then you can paste in your, I'll get rid of these brackets, and then you paste in your values here. Now, of course, it's gonna blow up because it's now referencing some stuff that doesn't exist, right? Like we got rid of form and it doesn't exist anymore. We can fix that quickly by grabbing values from use form, and and we can rename it to form. So it pretty much everything keeps working. And yeah. So everything seems to work. Let's check the initial values. Yes, we have our initial values correctly set. So everything is right here. We don't have any errors in TypeScript. Always make sure that you don't have any errors. So is everything working all right? Let's just check the console and make sure we don't have any warnings. Let's change some fields. And oh, we got some warnings here. And this says that the target is read-only. Now, this can be confusing. However, this means is this form value is now read-only. Now, VeeValidate enforces that, because you can think of VeeValidate as a value store for your forum, just like Vuex, just like Pinia. So in a way, it requires some controlled mutations to these values. Like you need to tell VeeValidate exactly what you are really doing here. Why are you changing this field value? Is it because of you are resetting it? Or is it because the user is changing it? The main difference here, like why does this matter? It's user intent. Like VeeValidate needs to know your intent, so it does some certain optimizations for you. For example, if you are resetting the field, then maybe validation shouldn't run while you are resetting the field. So this is like a minor thing. Also, if the user is changing the value, so validation should run as a result, right? And should it run for this event? So stuff like that. So let's make sure we don't get this warning to make sure we are conforming to the API correctly. So we need to set, we are basically getting this because of these two, like these two watchers are assigning directly to the values object, which we renamed to form. So let's change that. We will need a function called setFieldValue, and we can grab that and use it instead of these direct assignments. So let's pass the hard cap name. And I want to show you something really cool. Since we passed in the initial values, notice that as soon as you type, you get suggestions for the field names. This is because it's all TypeScript. VeeValidate understand that you gave in initial values, then these are probably the form fields that you have. So it suggests them for you. So we are setting here hard cap, I think, and we will set it exactly as the same statement as this one. So let's cut that, paste this, remove this. That's good. Now, same thing here for the soft cap. So set field value and soft cap. Then let's cut this statement, remove this, and we shouldn't be getting this anymore. So yeah, notice that as I change these, we're not getting these anymore. If you are wondering what these watchers are doing, they are always making sure that the soft cap never goes beyond the hard cap, and the hard cap never goes below the soft cap. So it's really good. It means one less thing to validate, since the form kind of makes sure that everything is correct. So this is nice so far. Now, if we try to submit this, let's go back to the Vue DevTools. And it's really nice to have this view for you, since a lot of things can go wrong while building forms. It's such a complicated subject, especially in complicated forms. Now, if we submit, the project is like our submission handler doesn't really do anything. It just says project created, no validation is being run. So let's fix that. Let's start by adding some validations in. And we will do that using Zod. So we'll import something called Z from Zod. Z is just a shortcut that allows us to reference multiple schemas. And if you don't know what Zod is a schema validation library. And this allows you to validate any kind of value, really, not just objects, any kind of values. And it's really nice because it follows a certain API that looks like TypeScript. It's similar to static typing. There are other libraries like Yup, and there is also the new one called Valibot. And both of them are really great options, and VeeValidate supports both of them in exactly the same way. So now let's define a schema. We can call it just schema, right? Like, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Then we'll call z.object. And then we'll pass it the object containing the schemas for the subfields, right? Like the title. Of course, Copilot is really eager to fill those, but I want to write some with you, and then we can use it for the rest. Title is a string. We have to give it a type first, of course. Then we don't have many requirements for it. We just want it to be required, so we can use something called not-empty, or you can use minimum and pass it like one character. So non-empty, and we can pretty much say title is required, or you can use the default message if it suits this scenario. It's completely up to you. And then we can also add a minimum check, like we want it to be minimum of 10 characters, right? And we can use the default message for that. Same thing for the description. We want it to be required, but there is no minimum requirement here. Now, this is the schema. We haven't really used it anywhere. So let's stop here before we continue the other fields and see what we can do with the form here. So the form can receive the schema using a validation schema property or configuration option, and we can pass in the schema. However, VeeValidate doesn't understand Zod schemas out of the box. You have to use a helper called toTyped schema. Now, the Nuxt plugin automatically understands that you are using Zod, so it will expose the right helper for you. Like toTyped schema is coming from the VeeValidate Zod plugin package. So the Nuxt plugin understands that and exposes the right one for you. And as soon as we did that, notice that we get some TypeScript errors here, like actually all over the component, but we'll get to them one by one. First, we get some TypeScript error here, and TypeScript errors are notoriously hard to read. But the gist of this is it says, I have no idea what the image is. It's not in the schema. So we should add it, which is a really nice added layer of security to your code, like type safety. You are making sure that you are not adding in some unexpected values that will show up in runtime. It's basically trying to consolidate runtime with static typing, which is really great here. So let's add the image. It can be just a string. But I guess we can require it. Then we have, again, notice the error, left the image and went on to the category ID. This means we are on the right track. So category ID, same thing. Soft cap, similar, but not quite. Let's not have any minimums for now, just z.number. Hard cap, same thing. It's z.number. And starts at and finishes that. Now, these are dates. However, we are storing them in the form as strings. So that means they should be a string. There is a date schema, like you can use dates here, but they are stored as strings, so we shouldn't really mess with that. But it's a good idea generally to store dates as either dates, numbers, or any kind of format that you can easily read to and write to. This one works because it's a standard ISO format, so that's really good. Now we fix the form errors here, but we have a bunch of them here. So what's that about? If we hover over here, it says soft is possibly undefined. Now that may seem weird to you, but there is this concept with VeeValidate and other form libraries called input and output values. So the input values are the values that are mutable, that the user can change throughout the application or while using your form. So at any given time, they can be undefined because I can easily remove this. or this. I don't have to provide initial values for everything, especially if they are empty values, right? Like if they are empty values, I don't really have to provide them. So there is a possibility that this can be undefined. So you should just guard against that. And we can do that easily by checking against undefined and making sure that form.hardcap is also undefined. And I'm checking specifically against undefined because soft and hardcap are numbers. So we don't want to do not soft and get rid of 0 if we want to. 0 is a perfectly valid number, so it should be left in. Same thing for the right here, but we'll swap this with hard and we'll swap this with soft cap, and we should not get any more errors in the script area, which seems to be the case. However, we still have some errors down here, which is the same thing basically. It says you can't call toString. Of course, you can read the error yourself, but it says finishes at is possibly undefined. So let's just use optional chaining here. We don't really have to handle it in nice ways. This is just the preview card right down here. So once we save that, we shouldn't have any errors. Everything should be all right. However, now notice that VeeValidate colored some of these fields as red, which means, hey, these fields are invalid because they don't pass the validation rules. But you don't have any messages aside from the image, which isn't here. We'll come to that in just a minute. So let's try not to forget this. But we have a bunch of errors here that we need to deal with. Now, we are not showing any of these errors. Like if I try to submit, it's still submitting. There is no error that appears. This is really weird, right? So that means we need to guard our submission against submitting. Like you can't submit the form unless everything is valid. So we can do that using a function called handle submit. And then let's go to your submission handler, this function called submit form. Now, all you need to do to guard it is just wrap it with handle submit, and you are done. Once you click now, the alert doesn't appear. This is because VeeValidate now only calls this if the form is valid, which is really cool. Now, if we click on the form, notice that there is something called submit count, and if I click, it keeps increasing. This is because it's invalid submissions, but VeeValidate keeps track of that. So you can debug whether the form is actually trying to submit or not, and it is actually trying to submit. However, it is invalid, so it won't run your submission function. Now let's get to the fun part, which is displaying errors, right? Like we did all of this without displaying errors. That's a shame. Let's display some errors. And we can go to the use field in the form field component, and we can grab another set of state that can help us, like error message. This returns the very first error message for you. You can also grab all the errors for this field, but we'll just settle for the error message. We need to inform the user what went wrong so they can fix their form. There is hardly anything to go by here. So where do we place this error message? Well, you'll notice we have a couple of nice places. You can place it instead of the hint, but I don't like that. The hint always helps them fill the field. So maybe we should keep the hint, but maybe we can place it on top here. I think this is an empty space that you can use. So we'll place it on the top aligned with the label for that field. So let's go to label here, and then we'll have our span. And of course, if there is an error message, we'll display it. Otherwise, we will not. Let's save and see if this does anything actually. Let me click publish, and notice that immediately we get a bunch of errors here. Required all over the thing here, which is really cool. So this means the validation is kind of working, but let's style it better a little bit. So let's give it some styles. I think we can use text XS since this is Daisy UI, and we can use Tailwind. So text is extra small. Maybe text should be red 500. Right? Yeah, that looks about right to me. And if we type in, notice that the validation is running. So we got validation working right now. That's pretty cool. However, the field is like, this is really easy to miss, right? Like the error messages are tiny. they are easy to miss. So let's make something a little bit more dramatic, but not too much, by like making the input fields reddish, like their border red maybe. So since we have field attributes here, we can actually take advantage of that, which uses the classes, right? It also uses classes to bind the classes to it. So we can just add a bunch of custom classes here. So what I want to do is I want to replace all these double quotes with backticks because we're going to add some template values in there. And basically, we want to watch for error message dot value. Remember that this is a reactive ref, so you need to access it with dot value. You can just use error message in the script, but you can use it directly in the template. So first thing here, this is a select. I think this UI has select error class, so you can use that. And I think you can use border red 500 as well, but I think it's better to use the tools that are available to you. So this will be text area error or an empty string if there isn't really any errors. Here, this will be input error and or an empty string. Once we save that, let's try to force a validation again. Notice all the fields now have red borders. If I click inside them, I get this nice ring, also red. This is because I'm using the classes available to me inside that framework, inside this CSS framework. So this is pretty much good. I think this does the job mainly. However, notice some kind of other weird stuff in here. Like this field doesn't have anything related to it, although we marked it as required. So we need to fix that. Also, if I try to change this, I'm getting some kind of really weird error, right? Like expected number received string. This is weird, right? So let's fix value integrity issues first. So the main thing here is this says expected number received string. Let's quickly go to the soft cap value, hard cap, sorry, value, and notice that it's really a string. So why did that happen? Well, the main reason is we are using this input and send input of type range, right? So vModel will not infer the field type automatically. So it will pretty much use whatever string value, like the value attribute on the native HTML value attribute always reports the value as a string. So you need to do additional logic to report as a number. Remember that we had vModel.number outside this component. But we can fix it right here. I want each component to be able to have their own value without any integrity issues in terms of value type. So we can use one more thing from VeeValidate here, something like handle change. Now, this is a helper function that responds to any kind of HTML and component events and pretty much tries to infer the correct value type from it. If it's a component, it'll just use whatever value passed in. If it's an input, however, then it can try to do a few things. So we'll see how this works. So what we want to do here is replace all your vModels definitions. We want to replace all of them with a normal value binding. This is pretty much like standard view binding. And notice that now this is one-way binding. How to get the second way is by binding the input event to handle change. And once you save that, if I change this, I'm not getting the error again. Right? I'm not getting any kind of errors for the value integrity. If I check both of these fields, both are numbers. So that's really good. Yeah. So now with our fields correctly reporting their values, we have nothing to worry about in here, I guess. So let's go back to the form and start working on some of the other missing stuff. So right here we have a couple of issues. First, this field doesn't really have any kind of anything happening to it. Like if I try to fill everything, right, the form is still invalid. And this might come as weird. Like if you click, nothing really happens. And this will seem weird to you. However, notice that in the VeeValidate DevTools, it tells you that this form is invalid. It's in red. Why? Now, if you go over the errors, it tells you image is required. Now, this is really useful because more often than not, you will end up having one additional field in the schema or one less field in your fields here in the template. You will miss something. So having something like a DevTools like this that tells you the point of view of the actual code, like it tells you, hey, there is an image missing here, so you need to work on that. So this is really helpful to debug your pretty much application. So your forms, sorry, in general. So let's fix that. Now, this component is called app file upload. And this component is really interesting because you need to ask yourself the question, is this a form field? It looks like a form field, but it certainly doesn't look exactly like a form field. Like, where is the name property? It doesn't seem to behave like a form field. So it's up to you completely here. You are the owner of this code. You can do pretty much whatever you want here as long as your decision is justified. So you can call use field here and add a name property and treat this as a field component or a field input field component. But I don't want to do that for this as an example. I want to show you how to integrate a component that's not really anything. Like, how can we validate something that does something arbitrary, like uploading images? It can be a part of a form. It can be something on its own entirely. So let's try to first get the value. Like, how can we register this as part of the form? Remember that we had this function that I told you that you can use with any kind of component, like define this component binds, and we can use it. So let's call this image field, and we can define the component binds and give it the image name. However, this component does not use vModel, right? This is why I think it's not really a form component, because it doesn't really conform to a vModel API. It doesn't emit value updated. It doesn't emit model value updated. It doesn't really work as a model component, right? Or an input field component. So it has this event called file uploaded. So we need some VeeValidate somehow to work with this. We need this binding to understand that whenever this event comes in, then this is the input event we are looking for. And you can do this pretty easily. You can pass in an options object, and this have something called map props. Map props allows you to pretty much bind anything to that component as part of the binding here. So we will return just an object containing that event, right? However, we'll need to prefix it with on. This is a Vue convention, events, and most events have this on prefix. So you can pretty much use event bindings as props like this by prefixing it with on. If you prefix it with file, it won't work. If you just keep it like this, it won't work. So prefix it with on, just a tiny view detail. And then we can grab the URL, since that's what this event emits, right? And then just like Copilot suggests, we can just set the field value of image to that URL. Right now, of course, it's complaining because I wrote an arrow expression without the arrow. So, yeah. Now let's see. Yeah, we have the image here, but does it actually add the image? Give it a nice reload, because sometimes I get this GWT error. And then I will use this NFT that I screenshotted of our Discord. Yeah, it says there is an error here. It says target is read only. Now let's check why we got that error. Remember that when we removed the vModel stuff, we didn't remove this event. So we need to do that. And also we forgot to bind this. Like, we aren't really using image field anywhere, right? Like, so let's use it. So remember to remove the event, just that you can see. We're adding vbind here. And we'll remove this file uploaded event because we no longer need it. Again, this will do the tracking for you. Once I save, let me reload to make sure everything is fine. Then I select the image. It should update here. Yes. And yeah, pretty much everything is working. Let's go back to the Vue DevTools. Image is now valid, and it has the URL of the image. So great. Maybe don't screenshot NFTs. Not sure. But yeah. So yeah, it works really well here. And we pretty much fixed this component. Now it talks to VeeValidate. However, it doesn't show any errors, right? Let me reset the form, and then let's try to, I don't know, submit it, right? We'll have a bunch of errors for the invalid fields, but this doesn't report anything, even though that it's invalid and it has an error message right here. So we can fix that by, let's go to the component itself. Let's say it can accept an error message prop, right? It's not completely a form component, but it can display some external information like this one. And then we can display it exactly in the same way. So in the label, we add another span, vf error message. Let's give it a couple of classes. Text extra small, text red 500, and then display the error message. Then in the input, let's do the same thing, but a little bit of a dynamic class here. So something like file input error. Yes, Copilot, I think, is correct on this one. And once I save, it should have like an error state that can appear here, but it doesn't because I didn't send it. Like now, VeeValidate doesn't understand how should this component receive its errors because it doesn't assume that it does, right? So we need to do that on our own. Again, we'll use map props, but map props receive a very useful object here called state. And this we can use to actually send the error message. So the error message prop will be state.errors, which are the errors for this field. This is the image errors. And once I click save, if I click submit, notice that we have the error message. The field is shining in red nicely. So yeah, pretty much this is your validation going on here. So yeah. So let's try to fill everything. Make sure the form still submits after all of this. It will be really shameful if it doesn't after doing all of this. These are valid now. So everything is green. VeeValidate reports that the form is green. So we should be able to submit it, and we do. Now let's talk about the input and output values. I talked about them before earlier, but let's recap them because the difference will show up here really nicely. So one cool thing about, I like to do something here is let's extract success and the error functions from use alerts so we don't use them too many times. Right, and then grab this, just a minor cleanup, and then we can call this right here. Yeah, so first thing is you can get the values for the form in here, in the handle submit. So you don't have to move around, figure out, okay, what was my values variable name, right? And this can get messy if your form is huge or if you have a tight space like I'm working with here. So I prefer to get the values from the handle submit callback because it's easier to work with from here. And there is a major difference here. So let's say you are working with the form values from above that you grabbed from use field, right? Let's say you want to call starts at .toString. Notice that it complains, right? Unless we add this optional chaining, it complains because it is possibly undefined. This is an input type. The form here is the form input. It can be undefined at any given time. So you need to be careful about that. So we have to add this, right? However, if you try to access it from the values, notice that it doesn't complain. This is because VeeValidate understands that from the Zod schema, you said that starts at is a string, and by default, it's required. This is how Zod works. However, if I call optional on it, I will get an error. So that means VeeValidate really understands how the schema works by inferring the input and output types of your schema, which is really nice here because that means you can avoid TypeScript errors that get reported from using the input types, and you can use the output types to submit your form, and every value should be correct, right? If you have required values, they will be present. If you have any other kind of values, they will respect whatever schema you have set. So that's the main difference between input values and output values. And let me quickly alert them so that you can see the values in their full glory. Now let's type everything again. I guess one problem with these online events is I have no idea if I'm lagging or not. So hopefully everything is going well. And then notice that we have the form object submitted in its full glory here. So everything is working well and projects created. So everything is nice. Now let's add some final touches. Like there are a bunch of stuff that we need to do, like to add validation on the dates, maybe on the hard caps, but yeah, you can do that. So let's do something really nice here. Let's assume that the user is forgot about these fields, right? And they click submit, and oh, I have a couple of errors here. So they will select an image, they will select a select, and they will click submit, but nothing happens, and they will be confused. This is a pretty long form for this window, so they might not see that there are errors here. So let's do something really cool here, is to scroll them to the error. That should be nice. So how can we do that? Well, VeeValidate handle submit function, while it receives the first argument as a success handler, it receives a second argument as an invalid handler. So you can run this whenever something goes wrong. So we can say something like, please fix the errors in the form. This is the bare minimum of what we can do, right? Like if I click submit here, yeah, we get this. But this is the bare minimum. This isn't really nice. So let's do something even better. We can grab errors from it using destructuring. And then the errors, this is an object containing keys as field names and strings as error messages. So let's grab the first key, which is the very first field that has an error. So field name will be object.keys errors, and grab the first key. Now, how can we scroll to an element? We can use the DOM API for this, scroll into view function to do this. However, we have a minor issue, is we don't have like what's the selector that we should use. So notice that in our field attributes that all of the inputs are using, we have something interesting like here we go, like a name. So we can use a selection either by ID or by name. So let's do name, and let's grab the element by using document query selector, and then yeah, Copilot got it right. We do this squared brackets to select that field, and then we can tell it to scroll. Of course, it can be undefined, so you need to use this optional chaining and scroll it in view, make sure the behavior is smooth. And something else I would like to add is block center. And what this is a native DOM API, it's not a view thing. And what this does is it scrolls to the element smoothly, it doesn't snap to the element. So there is a bit of transition here. And block center means we will center this element into the middle of screen, so it gets more attention from the user. So the user doesn't really, if it's right at the top or right at the bottom, the user may miss it, which is what we don't want here. Like we didn't all of this, so they miss the input. So let's click publish and see if this works. And it actually does. Like once I click, scrolls up. So let's pretend that I didn't see the first errors, and I fixed these two. Click publish, it scrolls up again. I fix this, go down, click, scrolls up again until I fix the form, which is a really nice experience, I would say. And we got our form objects. So you have validated, you made sure the errors are working well, like you are handling the errors really well by showing them, by scrolling to them. So that's really nice. And you are also handling the success operation really nicely here. So this is mainly what VeeValidate does. It gives you a bunch of abstractions, and it's up to you how to use them to integrate with your components, right? You have form field here, which is perfect use case for VeeValidate, because you can decide that, hey, maybe my forms should be powered by VeeValidate, and then use field can deliver a bunch of stuff for you. It's vModel syncing, value tracking, error messages, and syncing values correctly from native HTML inputs. And the rest is up to you. How do you style it? How do you display this information? It's entirely up to you. So this is a really nice thing about VeeValidate, and the major position it puts itself in. You are doing the building, but with a bunch of abstractions here. We still have, like, I'm not sure how much time I have, but just a quick tip on validating dates, because I don't think I have time to do them, is you can do them with refine. A refine function in Zod is basically a custom function. You can also use something else called custom schema and validate it, but refine is really nice here. And then you pretty much return true or false based if the value is correct or not. You can do something like this. This makes sure the date is in the past, and then you tell it an error message like date must be in the future, for example. Something like this would work. Not sure, but yeah, let's see if it works actually. I'm making sure that it's in the future. So yeah, it works perfectly. So yeah, you can do custom validation with refine. We can do the same thing for finish as that. And you can do multiple refines. Like we can add another refine here that checks the date is less than the end date and the other way around here. So yeah, this is pretty much it. And yeah, I think I'm done.
All right. Thank you so much for all of your going through all of that with us. We do have a few questions like, why would you use the composition API version of VeeValidate over the components?
Okay, that's a good question. It's really up to you. Like, it's really up to you what style you prefer. But for this specific project, I would say the composition API plays much better with the code because you want to have more of the logic in the script, right? Like if you want to write more script, then use the composition API because it gives you access to everything in your code, right? However, the components, you will get access to everything in scoped slots, which means it doesn't transfer to your code, your script. And then you could get stuck with a few behaviors. So I would say if your form is fairly straightforward and simple, use components if you like them. If you like the composition API, or if your form is slightly complex, use the composition API all the way. I would recommend the composition API all the way. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And is there a way to do async validation with VeeValidate?
What you need to do is you need to basically, well, I guess it depends on what do they mean by async validation. If you mean you have async rules, then yes, VeeValidate supports that. And
do you want to try with your camera off again? Because it sounds like you're breaking up pretty bad again.
Oh, sorry.
All good. I wish we could have you on camera. I can turn mine off too to make it equal and hopefully not take up too much internet. Could you restart the answer to that question?
Yes, I guess it depends on what do you mean by async validation. If you mean having async rules in the Zot schema, then yes, VeeValidate supports that. But if you mean that you want to do some things on the server, like the server is doing some additional validation, like is email unique, right? But then, yeah, then you can set the errors in the submission handler. So you can set the errors again in submission handler, telling VeeValidate, hey, this submission wasn't successful after all, and this are the new errors. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I feel like you started going into this a bit too of, are there some other form validation solutions for Vue.js? What do you think of sets VeeValidate? What you think sets VeeValidate apart? Okay,
so yeah, this is a really hard question because I'm really biased here, but I will try to answer it as objectively as possible. So there are, I think, a couple of other notable validation solutions. There is the Vuelidate, and then there is FormKit, which are both really great options, but each differs a little bit in in the philosophy of how you should be building your forms, right? So I think Vuelidate isn't actively maintained. I'm not sure, like someone should correct me on this, but Vuelidate basically is so easy to integrate into pretty much anything, like a data store with Pinia, or because it validates value, it doesn't really care about fields. It does have some abstractions for fields, but doesn't make them the focus of their solution. FormKit, on the other hand, and VeeValidate are really similar because both of them think that validation should be done declaratively. Like at the very end, they want you to define your form elements in the HTML, right? So when you do that, it's declarative and it's, I guess, familiar. Like it looks similar to the native HTML that we are all used to. So these are kind of agreements that both FormKit and VeeValidate have, but they are a little bit different in how this should be done. Like FormKit thinks that forms should be shouldn't be abstractions. They should be components, and you should use components to achieve the maximum value of forms. And they have a pretty great set of forms and form fields that you can use to components, basically, to build any kind of form that you have. But this is where VeeValidate kind of disagrees. VeeValidate thinks you should do the building because forms can be really complex. You can have your own branding for the forms, right? Maybe you're not using Material UI. Maybe you're not using a standard theme that some design languages uses. Most of the time, that was the case for me, at least. So you always have your own kind of brand to go for with forums. And then you have the kind of behaviors that you want to build from the ground up. So what VeeValidate tries to do is, okay, I will try to abstract as much as possible and expose it to you. There is nothing to override. There is nothing to change. There is no styling to override. There is nothing to you that you should change. You build the component yourself using this tool. FormKit is slightly different in that regard, but both are great options. I hope I was objective here.
You did a pretty good job. And that was our last question for the day. So thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.